Hi, my name is Kyle Folsom, and I will be demonstrating how to create a sales manager dashboard within Tableau. One of the growing challenges associated with the expansion of data analytics is how to present the information so that it is easy to understand and drives action throughout the organization. One of the largest areas of need is for the frontline employees that generate the revenue for the company. These employees' strengths typically are not within the analytical realm, and therefore they require extra attention in determining what information will be useful for them and how to present that data. So first, before we get started, I would like to go over the importance of creating a parameter rather than using filters. Parameters allow for multiple representations to be dynamic based on a single field. Tableau gives you the ability to filter on any field by simply dragging them into the filter selection, but these filters are only specific to the given sheet. So if we use filters, when we go to bring these representations into the dashboard, they will require their own selection in order to update. So not only will this make your dashboard unnecessarily busy, it will also be extremely inefficient to update. So now we're ready to begin creating the components of the speedometer. The speedometer will consist of two parts, the speedometer needle and then a background image that will be the actual image of the speedometer, which separates the 6 thresholds a manager can achieve. So first I want to start with the pieces needed for creating the needle, which is a line that has to be associated with the correct angle. This is a fairly complicated process to explain in Tableau, so I felt Excel was a better example. So first, to demonstrate, in order for the speedometer to accurately represent the hurdle achieved, it needs to be spread across the 0 to 180 degree spectrum. So I have to kind of go about a process of first identifying the percent achieved, if you will, of the hurdle. So if a manager has not hit any of the hurdles achieved, that meaning they hit hurdle 0, then they have hit 0% of the maximum hurdles they can achieve. And what I have to do is present these percentages as a percent of 180. What these 3 pieces equate to is now I can apply the cosine and sine formulas to actually get my coordinate points that I need for each hurdle. So for each of the fields I just covered, I now have as calculated fields within Tableau, as you can see with the angle formula and my percent achieved formula. You'll see a point at 0, 0 and a point for my actual month that's selected, which is June. So this is going to be the basis of my needle, and all I need to do is come over to the mark section, and instead of it being automatic, change it to line. And now we have our line that represents the needle of our speedometer. So the next thing we need to create is the background image that will represent our speedometer. So this can be done either in Excel or PowerPoint, whichever your preference, but the data set that we create needs to have 12 sections of equal value. So for the sake of time, I've already finished some of the other options we need to do. One of the more time-consuming ones is we need to hide the bottom half of the graph. So you can simply do that by just filling in each of the areas with a white fill and removing the data label, and that will give us essentially the speedometer that we're looking for. So now we're back in Tableau. So the way to bring in the speedometer image is to go to Map, select Background Images, and then select the only option that will be there. Select Add Image, and then browse for the image within our folders. Once I hit Open, you can see it pops up in the window. So now our hurdle achieved speedometer is done. We're ready to drag all these representations into our dashboard. So one of the first things you'll need to do is to select this icon at the bottom to create your new dashboard. The panel will be blank initially, but I've already brought in some of the representations to speed up the process. To drag in a representation, it's fairly simple. You just grab the worksheet name and drag it into the dashboard. Now, before you do that, you want to make sure that this floating icon is selected. It will default to tile. And I just find that the floating option is just easier to work with. So the next thing we need to address is how we're going to separate each of these graphics. We can create borders for each representation, but I find that's going to make the entire dashboard too busy. So I think a better option is to come to this format, select dashboard, and then we're going to provide a background color. So now that creates a nice border, kind of a natural separation of each representation, and it allows me to join multiple representations to make them look as one block. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do first on the speedometer, excuse me, and the speedometer statistics. I can manually drag this over and try to align this, but I find that's a little bit time consuming and very tedious to align perfectly. So the easier way to do this is to come over to this layout option, and you can see you're given values here for position, X and Y coordinate, and the size by width and height. Now the X and Y coordinate is always referencing the top left corner of the image. So I can use the speedometer as a reference to help align the statistics. So I can see my speedometer is at X value of 185 and a width of 384. So if I come to my statistics and change my X value to 185, now my left side is aligned with the speedometer, and the width of 384 will make it the same exact size. Now all I'm left to do is to essentially drag this straight up. You can play with the height of the Y coordinate of the image, but I think at this point it's probably easier to just manually drag up, and if we've lost that X coordinate, then we could fix it fairly quickly. So now you can see what that does is that makes this entire block look as one image rather than two separate representations, and I think it creates a much cleaner look for this for the dashboard. So as you can see, I've jumped ahead in my demonstration. I've brought in basically all of my representations and aligned them. And the reason why I skipped the demonstration is basically each representation required the same steps that I covered in the speedometer. And most of the cases were actually easier than the speedometer because for the employee close rate, for example, was one block of image in itself. So all it required was some minor formatting and editing the title, whereas the speedometer required me to merge multiple images and to make it appear as one. The last piece is I want to create a title for my dashboard. So I would come over to dashboard, select show title. Now it's going to start off as a tiled image. I want to change this to floating, but before I do that, I want to take a note of these three values so that I can quickly shift it back to this location. I just don't want it to be attached to the entire length of the dashboard. So I hit floating. My values were 8 for both X and Y and a height of 42. Now the width is a little more complicated. Basically, I want my width to come to an end at the employee parameter. So I need my width to basically be a mathematical equation to 640. And what I mean by that is I'm going to come over here. I have 8 as my value of X. And so that means I want my width to be 632. And you can see that brings it to the end of the parameter. Now all that's left to do is to give a little more formal title, which is sales manager dashboard. Let's make this bold, center it, and that's it. My dashboard's done. Everything is in a nice, neat format, and I have enabled all the representations to be driven off of just 2 parameters so that each representation updates with a single selection of either parameter. So I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration. It's been a huge learning process for me. I really didn't have much experience in Tableau before this class, and I really enjoyed figuring out how to create each of these demonstrations, and I think it's a great tool to learn. Thank you.